Yeah. Coming live.
While living in Oakland, I came across a gentleman who quickly became a dear friend. His name was Gabe. An odd duck for sure, but most of my friends are, so we're just going to get on with the story. Gabe was a standout. Dude was brilliant. We could talk the nuances of Bay Area rap crews, all of them, debate over the implications of specific events in modern history, delve into the chemistry of the perfect flourless chocolate cake, and so much more, much of which was way over my head. Gabe was brilliant, and he was easily one of the hardest hustling guys I've ever met. He did all of this with one crappy BMX bike and a backpack filled with everything anyone could need to get whatever job done. In this backpack he had baking wares, clipboards, flyers, and a flip phone. Yes, a flip phone. It was the late 2000s, but Gabe swore by the merits of that Nokia flip. Everything that Gabe needed to survive was in that backpack. Between jobs, Gabe spent time mentoring youth who had rough starts, going to basketball games of old mentees, and volunteering for causes that meant a lot to him. He had decent money, had a rough upbringing, and regardless of my many offers to crash on my couch, use my kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, or whatever minor offers of support I could provide, Gabe graciously refused. Gabe didn't have a home. And the more I got to know Gabe, the more it became evident that this was a choice he was making. This experience really opened my eyes to the many faces and facets of homelessness. It's not just vets or addicts or the down and out. It's a lot more than that. A problem like homelessness is not the kind of problem with a single cause, and thus a single cure. It's one of the more challenging and heart-wrenching situations many urban communities are confronted with in a very visceral and at times vile way. So, how do we go about solving this problem? New York City is spending $2.06 billion with a B on its Department of Homeless Services. There are 61,000 homeless people in the city, which equates to about $33,500 per homeless person. That's just a little short of the starting salary of a New York firefighter. Los Angeles recently doubled its homeless budget to $450 million. In other terms, that is 1% of the LA County budget, and that is meant to service a population of over $10 million, and that 1% is going to just 53,000 people. As Los Angeles threw more money at the homeless problem, its homeless population has only increased. San Francisco is going to be spending $279 million in the coming year on 7,500 homeless people. Seattle spending $63 million, up from $39 million 4 years ago. Well, the Puget Sound up in Washington is planning to spend $1.06 billion. Seattle's homeless population is up 44% in just 2 years. New York, LA, DC, Portland, Seattle, the Bay Area, yes, they're responsible for much of the national growth in homelessness, and activists are blaming the crisis on the soaring real estate prices. And while those are some of the most expensive cities in the country, they've had these levels of homelessness for some time now. These cities and many others are dedicating a disproportionate amount of resources to fighting homelessness, while the problem is only getting worse. And it seems that billions are being poured into solving this problem, and they're going everywhere but to the homeless. They're going to programs, to needle exchanges, to pooper scoopers, to police, to street outreach teams, and the list goes on. While there are a lot of mysteries about homelessness, one thing is clear. It is on the rise. And this flies right in the face of the dramatic increase in money being spent by the private, public, and social sectors trying to solve this problem. So in this episode, I'm excited to sit down with Akash Kalia. He is a social innovator that has taken an awesome approach to solving his community's homeless crisis. Akash, thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course.
So can you just take a minute before we jump into things and tell me a bit about you and what you're doing here at the Palms?
Okay. So I bought the Palms in 2012. At the time, it was a Days Inn. My parents had owned it for like 15 years before that. And so to go back a little bit more, is when I was 12, I got shot in the eye with a paintball gun. And I had cataract surgeries and a bunch of glaucoma surgeries. And from that, I actually had like a medical settlement from that experience. Yeah. And so in 2012, my parents, it was after the market kind of crashed, they got overextended business-wise. And I was going to school in University of Oregon at the time. And my mom called me on a Tuesday and said, "Hey, Kosh, like, we're about to lose everything. We need your help." And so I dropped out of all my classes on Wednesday, drove home on Thursday, looked at what they had and said, "This is what I have. What can we save?" And so that's where I bought the Palms. And at the time, it was a Days Inn. I rebranded it, went independent because it was a franchise. Did a bunch of work onto the property and ran it as an independent. Started like cleaning it up because it was a really poor shape at the time, and it was barely, not even, I was like, at the time in the first 2 years, I was actually living here because it was like, it made more sense for me to be here rather than drive 15 minutes either way to go home. And so I was like, might as well just sleep here. And so I was working, like 12 to 14 hour days, 7 days a week. In the beginning, I used to worry, like, if all of my employees cashed their check at the same time, I wouldn't have enough money to sustain it. And so, like, slowly building the business back up, being really mindful in the market that I was going for. So I shifted kind of where we were going and went directly for like construction companies, and so selling blocks of room to contractors.
Okay.
And because I was in Costco one day and I was like, how does Costco make sense? They sell a lot of stuff, but they reduce their profit margin. But because it's cheaper, but the way they make money is they sell more quantity. And I said, I have 104 units. If I reduce my pricing but sell more units, I'll make more money. And so that's what I did. Is I was giving these contractors really, really good deals, and we did like free breakfast in the morning, and then we had a market that had like beer and wine and snacks. And so like they would go. We served breakfast starting at 4:30 in the morning, because they all wake up really early. Then they would come home after work. They would go to the store, get beer or whatever, and then that was like a really easy thing for them, kind of. And so then slowly built the business back up over 3 years, and then I started making money like consistently. So I was like paying my employees a living wage, but I was still working 12 to 14 hours a day. Yeah. And I was like, you know what, I'm in my early 20s, like I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Like, what can I do that can pay my mortgage but have kind of a social impact? And so when I was in Oregon, my roommate was in the military. He was in the National Guard, and since leaving Oregon, he did a tour in Afghanistan and came back. And so seeing him, he was a different person than when he came back. And so like that was really impactful for me, because him and I were like brothers, And so being in the affordable budget hotel market, there are people that, this is, now I realize there are people who were homeless, took them a month in order to get the $50-$60 for a night, just so they could have a shower and sleep in a clean bed. And so it took people that long to get that much money to be able to get a hotel room. And so I was like, and in this side of town, this area was a lot rougher back in the day. And so just seeing kind of what was around us, I was like, what can I do that can have a social impact, but I still need to pay a mortgage. I'm not independently wealthy, Yeah. And so there's one hotel in San Francisco called the 250 Kearny Street Project, where they converted a 135-unit hotel into permanent supportive housing for veterans. And so I went to San Francisco, looked at that model, and I was like, you know what? Like, I think I could do it a little bit different, maybe even a little bit better, because we're on 6.4 acres. We have a bunch of green area, grass. And I was like, the first thing I thought of was like, you know what? We could build a community garden. We could have like all of these things, because there's so much you can get out of putting your hands in the dirt and growing something. And so my attorney, who I developed a close relationship with because I inherited a lot of legal issues in the years before, she happened to be the attorney who looked at that lease in San Francisco, because the city and the county of San Francisco leased that property directly from the owner. And so she was the owner's attorney as well. And so I talked to
this was just a total coincidence.
No. So because we developed that relationship, she kind of heard about this, like, she was looking at this lease and she was like, gosh, like, this is kind of interesting. And she's like, would you ever be interested in it? I was like, the first thing I said was like, what do I do with all my employees? Because like that was like being here, you know, like running this place. This was my home. In my phone, it still says Akash's home when I type in the address for the Palms. And it was like, you know, my employees, I had 18 employees, and it was like, these people were my family because I spent more time with them than I did with my family. And they, just as hard as I worked, they worked harder, you know? And so something right when she asked me like, hey, would this be something you're interested in? I was like, if I can make sure all my employees were okay, then yes, definitely. And so we timed the Palms out to be, I placed every one of my employees before we closed down, so nobody lost a job. And I just timed it out, and it was difficult financially for me, right? Because I had to close down before the whole conversion. So, but it was necessary, I think, for the people that worked here. And so we just like thought about this model, really developed this idea, and then we had a meeting here where we had all the big local nonprofits in the room and said, hey, this is like from the private side, I'm pitching you as a nonprofit service provider. Like, what if we could do this? Like, would you be interested in being the service provider for this model? And Jenny Lynn from Catholic Charities happened to like not put the meeting in her calendar and came like half an hour late. She almost didn't come at all. And she was the only person crazy enough in the room to be like, yeah, I think we could do that. And then there was people who were like, yeah, you could do it, but it's going to take like 10 years. And I was like, no, like and this is me being slightly naive at the time.
Yeah.
Just being in the private sector. And I was like, no, how long can it take? Like, this is plug and play, really. Like, because I was going to I donated all of the furniture because for me, you know, walking into a unit when you have nothing, it's better to have something to start with rather than just like a bed in a corner, you know? Like, and then as people develop income and things like that, they can make it kind of customize it to their own taste, but at least to have somewhere to start. And so we basically just said, hey, like, this idea. Jenny Lynn, Catholic Charities, was like, yeah, I think we could do it. I talked to the VA. The VA was, everybody at the time, there were these pots of money that were just sitting there year after year because they had allocated money for housing, but they had no housing. There was no one willing to house these people. And so we were like, you know, this is that solution. We're not spending millions and millions of dollars and years to develop new housing out of nothing. We're actually able to increase the housing stock by converting something into housing. And so that's kind of where this idea came from. And at the time, there were 6 hotels in the country that had done this similar model, and we were the first in the nation to do civilians and vets under the same roof. Because I looked at our local homeless numbers, and you know, we do have a high percentage of veteran homelessness, but we also have a really high percentage of unsheltered chronically homeless. And the unsheltered chronically homeless typically are and specifically locally, are the highest they use the most services, the most money in services, and they're those people who are most likely to die on the street. So we went in and we basically prioritized, we took the people who were the most vulnerable and housed them first, because essentially, like in a hospital, right? If you come in, if you go to the hospital at midnight and you have a stubbed toe and you think you might have broken it, but I come in the hospital at 1 a.m. and I think I'm having a heart attack, who are they going to serve first? Are they going to serve you first just because you got there an hour before me, or are they going to serve me first because they think I'm more
at risk?
At risk, exactly. And so the way our system of care was working before was that it was just purely on like a wait list, and it's like, no, you need to triage things. Like, people who are most likely to die, those are the people you need to be serving first. And so that's kind of the model that we took.
Fascinating. And I really appreciate that you've taken the time in that telling of the anecdote to kind of parse out, because I think a lot of times we talk about homelessness as like this monolith.
Yeah.
But I know there's so many nuances to this population.
Definitely.
So something that you corrected me on before we jumped on was, I said shelter. When I reached out to you, you said no, supportive housing.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
So the main difference between, and I get this a lot, the main difference between a shelter and permanent supportive housing, which the Palms is that Shelters are temporary, right? Temporary, whether it's you have a specific sunset date that you can stay. You can only stay there for 12 months at a time, or 6 months, or 18 months. It says it's transitional. Permanent supportive housing is permanent. So there's no sunset date. We let people organically transition out. And part of the reason they're on a federal level are realizing that transitional housing isn't actually solving homelessness. So oftentimes it's actually just prolonging someone's homelessness, because even when somebody's in transitional housing, they're not considered housed, because after that 18 months, they're back on the street. And what's really unfortunate is sometimes the criteria that people have to hit to get into housing, if you are in transitional housing, you no longer are considered chronically homeless, because you were housed for exactly. So it's essentially kind of like this cycle that gets created, and what really solves that on a most basic level, the thing that solves homelessness is housing, and that's it. And so it's really really simplified, but it's easy to put somebody into housing, to house someone. It's really hard to maintain that housing. That's where the case management, all that kind of stuff comes in. So with permanent supportive housing, it's housing with case management, supportive services attached to it.
Gotcha. And so what's kind of the average time that one of your, do we call them clients, residents stay here at the Palms Inn?
Yeah, so in the first 2 years, we had 68 people organically transition out. And out of that 68 people, the average length of stay was 362 days. So just about under a year.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we have a 93% retention rate, which is really high, which is basically like, and I was talking to a gentleman who kind of oversees the VA for Northern California, and we were kind of comparing numbers, because I'm really big on data. And they said the average in permanent supportive housing, what they want to see in successful outcomes is around like 90%, but we're a little bit higher than that, fortunately, which is really great to see.
That's awesome. Now, earlier you mentioned 104 units. Yes. Are all those units filled?
Yes.
And when I pulled up today, the parking lot's packed. There's a lot of activity, some service providers here, and I also saw some campers. Do you allow for people to park their campers here? And
so the people that have those fifth wheels or stuff, they're people who live here.
Oh, okay.
So that's just their vehicles.
Gotcha. So I know you're housing an impressive number of people here, and there's a lot more out on the streets here in our community and beyond. So how can communities, Santa Rosa, and others help scale models like yours?
I think what really is something that's really important for me is having this. If we just, as a system, just purely rely on philanthropy, it's really hard to get anything done. But if we can essentially open up your market to mom and pop people, business owners like me, who need to pay a mortgage but want to provide a social good, we've just increased the ability to get things done tenfold. And so really understanding that this, like what a true public-private partnership is, I think can really be beneficial for cities. Similar models like this, whether what I call it now is like innovative housing solutions. So whether it's converting hotels or converting office buildings into housing, things like that is, something that we all oftentimes are saying, oh, we need the housing now. There are things that we can do to make that happen, but it's just, are we willing to do it? That's the real question.
Yeah. And so what were some of the challenges working with the city to re-permit or recategorize what this facility was?
Yeah, it was very interesting. Fortunately, we have a lot of political will around homelessness and housing for homelessness. So the Palms is in this beautiful little thing called the city sphere of influence. So I'm in the county, but I'm also in the city of Santa Rosa's sphere of influence. So essentially, at some point in the future, this might be annexed into the city, similarly like Roseland. And so I essentially had to go through the county's permitting process simultaneously with the city's permitting process to make sure that it was a very interesting experience. But because we had that political support, and because it was this innovative solution that was incredibly needed, we had a lot of support around it. And so although we were able to fast track a lot of things and just streamline processes, because essentially what we would do is whenever there was any issue, whether it was the city or the county, we had a meeting where everybody came to the table and said, this is what we need, this is the issue, how do we tackle it? And then everybody kind of just fell into place that, oh, I know this person that can do this, I know this person that can do that, let's get it done. And so that was, we were able to get the Palms opened even through the permitting process like much faster than normal because of the need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so 2 years in, is this a profitable enterprise?
Yeah. So because now I've created this essentially consulting company to help replicate this model, because I really think that this is a huge thing that we can do to end homelessness. Mm-hmm. And what I say is the real value is in the opportunity cost. So if it was just purely about money, I could run a hotel and make more money, but then I'm working 12 to 14 hour days, 7 days a week. If a hotel owner could do something similar to this and not have to work there every single day and have that opportunity cost, the fact that individual can now go buy another hotel or whatever, that's where the real value is. And so that's the real profit. It's easy for people to say like, oh, you're grossing less than you were when you were a hotel, but yes, but I'm not working 80 hours a week. I'm just working 50, that's, yeah.
And so, kind of zooming out of Sonoma County, the poverty level across the U.S. has been stuck at 12% for about 40 years. And there's been, so much philanthropy, so many public efforts to shift this, a lot of caring, smart people dedicating their time and energy to it. But that number is stuck at 12. Why do you think this is?
That's a difficult one. I think it's because communities oftentimes are somewhat nearsighted in, similarly like with relating it back to the Palms, where people say, oh, you're putting all this money into subsidizing people's housing, right? So the Palms, it costs the community $13,000 per person per year to house them. So that might seem like a lot of money, right? But if you look at it, the average chronically homeless individual in Sonoma County costs the system of care $96,000 per person per year in services. Yes, whether it's jail, law enforcement interaction, hospitalization, all of these things. And so that's where people need to see, and similarly like with First Five, they're realizing, it's like upstream investments. Right. And I think that is kind of what correlates with the poverty rate as well.
So how is it profitable if everyone is staying here for free?
So that's a common misconception. So everybody pays 30% of their respective income towards their housing. So HUD basically determines a fair market rent for the housing, essentially like a price ceiling, and everybody pays 30% of their adjusted gross, because affordable housing truly is supposed to be 30% of your adjusted gross. Oftentimes all over the country, and specifically in California and Santa Rosa, oftentimes people are paying much higher percentages of their income towards their housing. But so at the Palms, say someone comes off the street and they have zero income. For that time that they have zero income, their portion of their rent is zero. And so as they are signed up for different services, whether it's disability or if they have gained employment or things like that, as their income increases, their rent proportionally increases as well. So it essentially promotes it promotes people to gain employment, because the more money they make, their rent is still proportionate to that amount. Okay. And so I did a study because I see how much their percentage, their rent portion is, specifically for the veterans. From June of 2016 to June of 2017, the average veteran's income increased by 32% in that calendar year. So that shows you that when people come in, they're with no income, with all the services that are provided and all the support, and whether it's treatment plans or employment plans or budgeting plans, they slowly develop that employment and income, and then they transition out organically when they're ready.
And you're able to have oversight over their income through a case manager?
No, so
Or is it self-documented?
No, yeah. So the local housing authority, they're the ones who do income verification,
Okay.
and so I essentially, the way it works is, the subsidized portion gets paid to me, and then the tenant portion also gets paid to me. So that's how I see how much that tenant is contributing towards that rent.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Do you think that there's a shifting in this sector of, treating this problem towards a more upstream approach?
I definitely think so, and I think on an even more macro level, that social entrepreneurship and like benefit corporations, I think that is the future of business, and I really hope that is, because with like me and my mindset is we as business owners can really use our business as a force for good.
Yeah.
And if we do that, and if we as a benefit corporation, you basically just say before. In your articles of incorporation, before saying to maximize wealth for its shareholders, you say, I'm going to account for the environmental and social impacts of my business and before profits. And that is truly what I think needs to happen to get some serious stuff done.
And is the Palms now a B Corp?
I'm in the process of becoming a B
Okay,
Corp. Yeah.
okay.
I'm pending.
Pending?
Yeah.
And what is that process like? I've heard a lot of people talk about that. But
Yeah, so on a state level, there are no tax incentives to be a B Corp. On a state level, it's you basically just write in that sentence before in your articles of incorporation, but then there's also essentially like certification organizations like Be Local, and they essentially certify you as a B Corp. So I'm going through that process to get
Gotcha.
certified as a B Corp.
Gotcha.
Exactly. There are quite a few companies in Sonoma County that are B Corps, like World Centric in Petaluma. They make compostable food service products. They're a B
Okay. Corp,
really amazing company. They donate 25% of their net profits to organizations, and they do a lot of work all over the world. There's
It's Guayaki?
Guayaki's a B Corp. Traditional Medicinal is a B Corp. Three Twins is a B Corp. Ice cream. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Is there a connection between you and them, like some sort of mentorship or collaborations that you guys are able to do?
Yeah, I've been to some B Corp events, and it's incredible just to hear that. And a lot of these companies are really large, right?
Yeah.
And making incredible moves. So I think there's a lot that I can learn from them, and kind of just try to help them out while they help me out.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. It's built into their ethos, I
Exactly.
imagine. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, when we started chatting here, you kind of broke apart the nuances of the homeless population, but if we put them all back together, when it comes to trying to solve this issue of homelessness, what's the elephant in the room?
The elephant in the room, and has been in the room for many, many, many years, is NIMBYism. That is not in my backyard.
Yeah.
That whole concept that, even on a more macro level of like affordable housing development, there's this whole thing about people not wanting affordable housing developments in their neighborhood because they believe that it'll drive their property values down,
Right.
or it will, this whole concept of like, traffic concerns and all of these things, it's like, no, like we need to prioritize and that's what I was kind of talking about earlier. Like we can be nearsighted and say, there might be traffic concerns, but you don't realize in the long-term picture, it's going to cost our community, even on a financial level, to support it's cheaper for us to house people than it is for us to not house people. That's basic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I asked that, and I was expecting you to say something about mental health.
Oh, yeah. Mental health is also a huge, huge concern. Like for here, and directly with the Palms, one of my long-term goals is to have a satellite clinic on-site mental health professional, because that there's such a need for mental health services.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's one thing you think people should know about this population you're dealing with?
I think people don't realize how easy it is to become homeless. And I think people often treat people who are experiencing homelessness as if they were invisible. And so on a very, finite level, just looking someone in the eye and saying hello and acknowledging someone's presence and smiling is incredibly important. But then also realizing that, these are people's mothers and fathers and daughters and sons, that's something that is it's overlooked oftentimes. And people don't realize how easy it is to fall into the cycle, whether it's from, the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness have a traumatic brain injury. A very high percentage of people experiencing homelessness have serious mental health issues, and that's because our mental health system in America is nearly non-existent. Yeah. And the people who are oftentimes experiencing homelessness are people who would have been in, mental health institutions, and they don't have that option anymore. And so, that's really what it comes down to.
When I was doing research on, some innovators in this space, you were really a shining light for me because of this public-private partnership. So I'm glad we were able to sit down.
You.
But you're in the space, you live and breathe this. I'm curious, what other models or innovations in this, or innovators in this space, are exciting you?
I think for what I really see, my personal future is not only is kind of expanding this model and helping other communities replicate this similar model, but also in affordable housing development in general. And I think modular multifamily housing is the future of affordable housing. Not only from a financial perspective, it makes it much more realistic to actually build affordable housing by using modular construction, but also from the environmental perspective. The savings for utilizing less waste with construction materials using modular construction is incredible, and I think we can build affordable climate, environmentally efficient housing with modular construction.
Is there an example of a community somewhere in the States that's doing a beta run of this? Or
there are a few developers or affordable housing developers in the Bay Area that are using modular construction. One of them is Panoramic, I believe, and he actually piloted, I can't remember the gentleman's name right now. Might be Tim Kennedy. Actually, I don't know. But he had a prototype of a micro apartment specifically for homeless in San Francisco, and creating essentially like a modular micro multifamily kind of structure into permanent supportive housing, similarly like the Palms.
Yeah.
So the Palms, their units are 300 square feet each, but these micro units are slightly smaller. They're like 220 or something like that, which is pretty small, but you have to have a lot of them.
Yeah. And where does density play into this?
I think density, and specifically when you're talking about permanent supportive housing, so dealing with really vulnerable populations, density is a very fragile thing, I believe, is because the only thing that makes the Palms sustainable is having really robust services on site. And so you're dealing with a lot of vulnerable people, and if you don't have those services that are really robust, then it can be problematic. And so that's where the density, you have to play with it a little bit, because I don't think you shouldn't have everybody experiencing homelessness in Sonoma County living in one place. That's
right.
Basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so, but I think there are economies of scale, whether it's in services or just in housing in general, by having slightly more dense properties like the Palms. We have 104 units. Right now we have like 130 people living here, so there's a few couples basically.
And what, this is 3 acres?
6.4 acres.
6.4.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to the freeway.
Okay.
Yeah. So the long-term goal is to actually build more housing on site. And so what I want to do is, what I've seen now in the last 2 years is that the jump from the Palms permanent supportive housing into just a regular apartment or even affordable unit, that leap is very large, because a lot of people are coming in with zero income.
Right.
And so what I want to essentially build is apartments on training wheels. So something that's slightly larger, has a full kitchen, has like a little bit nicer space or bigger space, where like currently the Palm side, it's very intense case management, right? But so I want to build essentially apartment on training wheels where it's slightly less intensive case management, and then it's an easier transition to a market rate unit from there. So and physically it'll give people who first come into the Palms kind of a visual goal on site, and so that's kind of the whole long-term goal.
I really think that that's something that's missing when we keep talking about this housing crisis, like this laddering up and through to something that works for us.
And if we can build more of these kind of apartments on training wheels, it then opens up those units that people are currently taking for the next person. And so having it be, that's why what I love about the Palms is the fact that it's organic. You don't push people out. People leave when they are ready to leave, and that's why we have a higher success rate because of that.
Okay. So what do you think people should know about you as a social innovator?
That's a really difficult one too. For me personally, I think, I don't know actually. I mean,
why did you take this on? And you told the story at the beginning, and you made it sound like it was convenience, and you've obviously got a big heart.
I mean, I think it's because of what can we do to maximize our impact while we're here in this, on Earth, and realizing that it's not purely just about how much money you can scurry away. It's about how many lives that you can change in that process. And I think it can be both. I think in an ideal world, the more good you do in the world, the more money you should make. Like that's just the way it should be, right? And not the other way around. And so that's kind of, yeah.
All right, that's a good transition to the next question, which advice to other people who aspire to be social entrepreneurs or are in the midst of a project themselves.
I would say just work really hard. That I think is, whether it's an innovative solution or a social solution, is just work hard. And if one person says no, then don't let that stop you, because just like that first meeting that I had with all the nonprofits, there are more people in the room that said no than yes, and you don't let that stop you, because if you think through your ideas, you shouldn't let no stop you.
Final words, calls to action, plugs.
I mean, a plug is the housing bond that is currently in the process in the city of Santa Rosa, Measure M, I believe.
Okay.
I can double check. Because that specifically earmarks some of that money into permanent supportive housing, which is incredibly necessary. And really, we need to stop saying not in my backyard. We need to start looking at the community as a whole, and what is our role to play to create a better life for our entire community, not just for ourselves.
Yeah. It's easy to lose sight that we are one connected entity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Akash, thank you so much for all you're doing and
Thank
taking the
you.
time to sit here with me today.
Thank you.
Learn more about Akash Kalia and his innovative approach to our homelessness challenge online, and find him on LinkedIn. That's AKASH, last name Kalia, Kalia. His supportive housing model, not a shelter, is dubbed the Palms Inn, and there is some great coverage of this story at PressDemocrat.com. I'm going to do something that's not too cool to do in the 21st century. I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a step back from all these interviews because a common theme's emerging. I got to name it. So over the last 2 months, I've interviewed 11 social innovators working in the highest of high tech: global health, law, roofing, finance, diversity, equity, and inclusion, data security, and philanthropies, and direct service, and I think there's some other ones in there as well. And in every conversation, I have heard the word connection. Connection was central to the innovation that all of these different innovators are creating. The Pillar Project is connecting users and their data. Dr. Kahana straight up said that connection is the cure to the immediate and existential challenges that healthcare presents. Piers from Radix is connecting innovators with better tools. Dolores Estrada and the California Endowment are connecting youth and community stakeholders to civic processes in profound ways. Letitia Hankey of ARS Roofing is connecting the gap between the skilled labor shortage and those who need good-paying jobs. And Akash was able to make the Palms Inn such a success by connecting the private and public sectors together around a shared effort. Connection, connection, connection. As I sit here, we pass another week of increasing polarization, and I believe that connection is our path out of this current phase of our immature democracy. We can't write off the other half of the country, the other half of the state, the other half of the process, the other department, the others. The only way out is through connection. Connecting to those on this imaginary other side and finding common ground. The Pareto principle states that roughly 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. So flipped on its head and applied to our current lack of connection, I understand this to mean that we, all of us, agree on 80% of things. And then we spend 80% of our time focused on the 20% of things we disagree on. I guess that's human nature for you. And within human nature, there's a lot of hope, because Pareto tells us that we have a lot of common ground to connect over and build upon. It's also human nature that has stepped up to the challenges to solve seemingly Sisyphean efforts time and time again. Doomsday sayers have been doomsday saying since before the dawn of time, and Chicken Little has been crying about the sky falling for eons, and it still hasn't hit the floor. The stories that we've explored on this season of Onward give me hope. These stories are filled with the ingredients of what makes humanity great, and there are so many more to tell. So now I put the questions to you. Whose story do you want to hear? What societal challenges do you want to hear being solved? Let me know. Go to dweinzveg.com/onward and drop a line in the suggestions and feedback section there. Really appreciate you tuning in and to feed and connect with the good wolf within you and our society. And I'll be back next season with some more great guests, a new format, and more cutting-edge social innovations and innovators. Until next time, onward and upward.
Yeah.
For the last time this season, I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart my first and only sponsor, Jay Lately. Jay Lately is a hip-hop artist out of Oakland, California. He's been a long-time supporter of all sorts of great community causes. You can listen to his positive lyrics and his great tunes at soundcloud.com/justlately. And if you're interested in sponsoring next season, please let me know. Drop me a line at dweinzveg@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to Onward at soundcloud.com, iTunes, or Anchor FM. And like that, Season 1 is a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.